Hey, everybody. Hope everyone's settling in online. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Nick Bornstein. I'm the general manager of the Webby Awards, and I'm so excited for this conversation today entitled Crafted Future, UX for a New Era. This is done in partnership with our friends at WP Engine, and we have some really fantastic UX leaders here today to explore new user experience and user interface trends and strategies that work from concept to conversion. Many of you probably already know this, but the landscape of digital product design is transforming rapidly. Efficiency, hyper-personalization, accessibility, all of these things are now top consumer and industry expectations. So as a result, brands and agencies must adapt to ever-changing user behaviors while leveraging emerging technologies to scale. And amidst so much change, we have to ask, how do we meet this new era for UX? So that's what we're here to do today. Really excited to have our panelists with here and here to discuss. We have several wonderful people. First is Jingshuan Yu, digital product designer at L&R. Jingshuan is known for her innovative, visually compelling, and intuitive digital designs that foster seamless digital transformation for clients. She adeptly navigates complex design challenges with a focus on simplicity and employs the latest in technology to set new standards in UI and UX design. Welcome, Jingshuan. Thanks so much for being here. Next up, and this is always so fun, right, to sort of hear your bio presented to you as you're with me. But next up is Andrea Wofford, lead web UX designer at WP Engine. Andrea brings over 2 decades of design expertise to her role. She approaches challenges with a keen focus on user-centric design, coupled with an unwavering commitment to high standards and a solid foundation in visual design principles. Hello, Andrea. Thanks so much for being here. And finally, let's bring up Celine Wang, who is an interaction designer at CMYK, a digital agency based in Dumbo, Brooklyn. She works at CMYK on a wide range of products that are driven by aesthetic, strategy, UX principles, and business goals. Welcome, Celine, to you as well. Well, thank you again. Really excited to have this conversation today. You all do come from such really diverse and unique backgrounds. And I think it'd be great to maybe kick this off by having you each tell us a bit about yourself and your background, especially as it pertains to UX and digital design. Andrea, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Andrea Wofford. I'm lead web UX designer at WP Engine. So I specifically work on our marketing website, which is the wpengine.com. And I've been designing professionally for a little over 20 years now. Started out in print, moved into identity and branding, website design, all kinds of different media. A few years ago, I was working as a creative director at an agency and decided to make a pivot into UX design because I felt like it was really an interesting path forward and was more forward-looking and data-driven, and it just really excited me. And so I've been doing that now for about 3 years here at WP Engine.
That's amazing. And was there a moment that created that pivot for you? I'm curious, like, was there something happening in your visual design career or, that pivot? What sort of came through for you?
Yeah, I think that it was kind of putting almost like a science to what I was already doing. Mm-hmm. So I was already doing, a lot of visual design and website design, and I was making a lot of decisions about how to craft those experiences. But with UX design, you can put numbers and data into it and research, and you can actually explain what it is you're doing and how it's making an impact. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was just a really nice sort of next step in my career, was to explore that. And it was also sort of validating in order to I was already doing a lot of these things, and here it is actually proving to me and my users why it's working or not. Mm-hmm. And so I just found that as a really exciting next step.
That's great. Thank you. Celine, what about you? Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Celine. I'm a digital designer at CMYK. We're a full-service agency that specializes in web design, video, and graphic design. So I actually graduated in May of 2022. I have a BFA in graphic design. I minored in communication studies, but I was always interested in UX design after taking a course. So I also got my certificate in UX design. And similar to what Andrea said, I really love being able to kind of bridge the gap between people and design, and it's very validating and rewarding with the work that we're doing. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
That's great. And it's so interesting to hear that same perspective of sort of blending creative with the business, with the data. You studying graphic design sort of went immediately into UX. Was that sort of a by design move for you, or did that sort of happen? Tell us a bit about how you went from graphic design into the UX field.
Yeah, so at the time where I went to school, graphic design was kind of the only major that was offered. I did take a visual design thinking course, and from there, that's kind of what sparked my interest. And not many people, I think, in my class were doing that. So I kind of like took it upon myself to kind of expand on it. I was talking to my professors a lot, and a lot of like utilizing ADP lists, for example, to talk to mentors and kind of just doing my own research. And that's kind of how I segued into that.
Awesome. And Jing Xuan, tell us a little bit about your background as well and what you're working on at LNR.
Yeah, sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Jing Xuan. I'm a product designer from LNR. So my work focuses on everything that's related to UX. I'm responsible to assist our design team, amazing design team, to standardize our UX process, our end-to-end process, and making sure we evolve and execute based on industry best practices. And I also take care of product needs, UX needs, obviously from our clients.
That's awesome. And maybe we can start with you, Jing Xuan, but what does the state of UX and digital design look like in 2024? Do you have sort of a state of affairs of how things are looking right now in terms of UX and digital design?
Yeah, this is great. I think it's at a state of pivoting and evolving, just it continued to be in past decades. I definitely see like experience design has become more curated, more personalized to provide higher values to individual users. For example, a lot of user-generated content and feed and platforms uses special algorithms to customize the information that a unique user will receive based on their interests and behaviors in order to achieve a set of KPIs. I think we have seen also a lot of increase in voice and gesture interfaces. We've seen the newest Apple release with the Vision Pro headset. It requires users to be familiar with a set of new gesture that interacts are quite different from when people are using smartphones or computers. We also have lots of examples of voice interfaces and experience design, including like ChatGPT voice, Siri, Alexa, and etc. I've also noticed an increase of collaboration tools that support remote productivity. I think this has been a trend since many years ago, especially when the pandemic starts. For sure, the pandemic has accelerated the rising of these digital products. But as a matter of fact, I think the user experience design has become more collaborative too when AI is inevitably incorporating into these digital products.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into all of this. I think I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this hyper-personalization and sort of AI and how that's integrating into your work. But Andrea, I've seen you're nodding a little bit as well. I'm curious, how are you seeing the state of UX and digital design in this year, 2024?
Yeah, I mean, to echo a lot of what you just said, I think I'm seeing a lot more personalization, and it's becoming a lot more prevalent, but it also at the same time feels like it's still in its infancy. Like we are just now starting to unlock it and figure out how to best integrate it into the user flow. And just making sure that it's being helpful for the user and not intrusive, and finding that really delicate balance. So I'm seeing a lot of that, and also just more emphasis on inclusive design, accessibility. I think you mentioned this earlier, Nick, but it's really kind of just becoming an expectation and not something that a designer is just having to sort of advocate for on their own. And then I'm also just seeing more emphasis on making a tangible connection between the UX design and business goals and how they're driving those business goals. Designers and UX designers are not order takers. They're not just doing something someone tells them. They're actually becoming part of the strategy and figuring out how to meet those business goals. And we're learning how to speak the language of the stakeholders and really bringing validity to what it is and what we're doing and how it's driving that growth.
Totally. I think that's fascinating. And within your 20 years, I'm sure you've seen major leaps and bounds and evolutions. I'm curious, Celine, on your side, having been in this business for a couple of years, graduating in 2022, have you noticed major evolutions even in the last couple of years that you've been at CMYK?
Yeah, I agree with everyone's points. I feel like even now, like I'm constantly learning about the UX space and how everything is evolving. And to everyone's point, I think context is such a big thing too. A lot of us are thinking about, personalization, but also where the users are in the space, where they're experiencing, how they're experiencing it, and why. So I think we're in a very pivotal moment where there's so much exciting things coming.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like there's a lot to look forward to, but, maybe to set the table, Andrea, what practices are out? Have you noticed any practices, sort of things being left behind, or tactics that really just aren't cutting it anymore in this sort of influx of accessibility, inclusive design, and hyper-personalization? What are sort of the ways of your?
Yeah, I think that there's a move to get rid of the clutter. I think that there was a tendency in the past to over-design, make things more flashy, make things kind of exciting, but in a way that was maybe not necessarily serving the user. And so I'm seeing sort of a movement towards simplifying things and keeping it simple and removing anything that could potentially get in the way of a user accomplishing their goal. So I'm sort of I'm seeing that as a trend, and not just designing for the sake of designing, if that makes sense.
Totally. It almost feels like this sort of cultural movement around maximalism is starting to sort of find its way into the UX and UI space of wanting it to feel simple and more accessible.
Right. And I think accessibility is a huge driver there, because a lot of those things get in the way of accessibility and inclusive design. And so you got to get rid of them. And I think it also serves users who don't necessarily need accessibility considerations as well.
Yeah. Well, to that point, Jingchuan, what does accessibility and efficiency in UX look like? How are people doing this, and how can teams prioritize their users' needs in design?
Yeah, I think to answer your first question, I'm also going to echo what Andreas pointed out, that I believe and hope companies will be more inclusive in their design process. Obviously, when encountering accessibility issues, as it's evolving, it'll be increasingly important to consider how they want to handle accessibility issues from the start for a product or a service than just applying it afterwards. Because as I've mentioned, the experience will be more personalized. The accessibility for target audience will be more influential to all the journey, to the overall journey of the users, which is also the key to increase the product efficiency.
Mm-hmm. And are there considerations that designers or design teams can make to ensure that their work meets and exceeds these industry standards and the sort of needs of the consumer?
I think it's still important to understand what the team really want the most and what you want to drive your user's experience to be within the budget and timeline and other constraints. I don't think this will be particularly new, but it's so important for designers and design teams to make sure that the design decisions are based on reasonable use scenarios. Here's an example of designers somehow overlooked it. So We Are Not Color, the famous manufacturing company, they recently announced that they have incorporated generative AI models in their toilets. Now their customers can command AI to open or close the lid, heat the seat, flush their toilet, etc. But notice this kind of incorporation doesn't solve a new user need. User pain points are the same, but it creates a new behavior problem. Like, who is used to open their mouth when they're using the toilets? So one might argue that this is a possible future scenario, but it all involves a lot of behavior, psychological, and even cultural conversations.
Totally. I had not heard of that. I will have to look that up after this after this session. I think that feeds really nicely to a question I want to pose to you, Celine. We're talking a lot about, how user behavior is evolving and it's changing how they interact and how they engage. And I guess, what are some things that you're seeing user behavior change? What does that look like? The change in user behavior, and how is that, potentially impacting your work?
Yeah, I feel like good UX at its core, it's always been about getting a user from point A to B in the most efficient way while making that process enjoyable. And I think nowadays people have so much access to all this, like all these different platforms, devices, and technologies that they're kind of constantly being stimulated by all these things. And I think people value transparency, especially now, and honest design. And they want to get their information and feel like they understand what they're kind of taking in.
Do you think that there will be some significant changes that will impact UX design this year or even in the year ahead? We'll talk a little bit more about this with the group, but I'm curious, just as we're talking about it, like, are there some changes or significant changes that you might forecast?
Yeah, AI, as we've talked about, is such a big thing, and it's constantly evolving. And nowadays, because of that, it's not so much about just making things functional and visually appealing. I feel like now, like brands and agencies, we really have to think about base our decisions on human behavior and really research our users and understand what they're drawn to and why they're drawn to those things. And during this process, we don't necessarily have to sacrifice brand expression. Not everything needs to be super flashy. Sometimes simple is better. And yeah.
And I think we're touching on where we're leading, sort of the things that we're looking for, simplicity, less clutter, hyper-personalization. I'm going to pivot back to you, Andrea, again. I asked you what are some things to leave behind. I'd love to maybe think about now what defines good UX right now? What are the things that we want to hang on to as we evolve the space?
Yeah, I think that Celine made a really great point about the human interest there. But so I think that the philosophical part of UX design is always keeping that user in mind. And when you're talking about business strategies and goals, we as designers really have to advocate for those users and know them and do our research and know, how they're using our products or services and meet them where they are and make sure that they're feeling seen. And at WP Engine, we have a core value called customer inspired. And that is something that I feel like my team especially always goes back to when we're making decisions. Is this customer inspired? Is this serving them in the best way possible? And what can we do as their advocates to make sure that they are getting the best experience possible?
I love that. And I think that that's really great philosophy to think about, how can we successfully lead users down the funnel to conversion? Are there certain techniques or tactics? And I think at WP Engine, you guys do such an amazing job doing that. But, do you feel like there are certain practices that can really help lead those users down the funnel?
Yeah, I think so. My web experience team is incredible, and we work together to iterate and find different components or different strategies that work, and test them against each other to always be trying to improve them. But some of the best ones, or the go-tos for us that seem to work really well, would be just really clear and intentional CTAs, so call to actions, making sure that the user knows what the next step in this should be, and not giving them too many choices, so where they could potentially veer off course.
Yeah.
It helps them stay focused on what it is we're wanting them to do. And then just making everything as easy as possible. So, for example, if you have a form that you want them to fill out, remove any barrier that might prevent them from wanting to fill out that form.
Yeah.
So get rid of any unnecessary fields. If you are able to use something like personalization that allows it to automatically fill things in for them, great. I can't wait to see how much better forms are going to get as that technology increases. And then I think, as far as funnels and best practices for conversion, my mantra is just test, test, test. You can't go wrong with trying something out and monitoring the results of it.
Totally. And I'm seeing both Celine and Jingshuan nod their heads at the testing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Jingshuan, do you feel like are there other maybe design elements that are proven to build high conversion experiences, or how designers can translate business goals into UX?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what this going to be interesting, because I was going to say it's going to be depend on the collaboration and then the alignment with your clients.
Yeah, totally. Well, and do you feel like there are technical considerations that brands and agencies, the clients, should make to match this moment? Like, can they be evolving their tech stack to set themselves up well for these new user expectations?
Yeah, that's a very great question. I actually had the similar conversation with one of our amazing engineers, Yvonne, the other day. So in LNR, we are constantly reviewing new tools and technologies. We through this way, we find the suitable internal projects to test them if this new technology can be used in scale for us in the future. Well, to notice that there will be a lag when a new concept came out between when we decide it's suitable and stable to use. And I think that's not necessarily bad, because that assists our growth along the way and makes sure us to be trustworthy as a partner.
Yeah. And one other question I'll just pose to Celine is, do you think, is there something that it's going to take for brands and agencies to successfully engage audiences to meet business goals? I know we're sort of always thinking about magic buttons and tools, which unfortunately are magical for a reason, but I'm curious for your take on what brands and agencies can be doing to successfully engage audiences.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you guys said, and I think it's just, again, going back to what doing our user research and kind of balancing brand expression, and also figuring out, analyzing the trends of what users are drawn to and what they're interacting with the most, and using that to drive our design decisions. Great.
So we've been talking a lot about sort of harnessing new technology and sort of how that can play a role in this work. Jingshuan, we already talked about it today. We've been talking about it all year at the Webbies and beyond. And we know that you're all experimenting. We're experimenting with generative AI in our own work. But Jingshuan, I'm curious, where do you think AI fits in the conversation on UX?
Yeah. If I say I know exactly how this new technology will fit in, that's a lie. However, I assume AI as a powerful tool will help to facilitate the expansion of UX to more fields outside of internet products, for example, healthcare products, bio products, etc. It will, of course, shift the role of what user experience designers will do, like Celine and Andra mentioned, instead of completely replacing us. It may force designers to be less focusing on the new UI patterns, because AI will be able to generate massive amounts of these sooner or later, but more focus on a mastery of understanding languages and design for experimental peaks and lows within the context. Yeah, and I think based on that, I would recommend teams to start experiencing it in work, trying it out, really testing these AI tools at work yourself, so that you could get a sense of where the boundary it is in current technology deployment. I usually work in Figma. There are AI plugins for example, DALL-E icons, Copilot for brainstorming, Assistant for wireframing, a lot of them. So generally speaking, teams can also look into like online resources to experience AI tools. For example, I know I don't know if you're all exposed to this, but Nexa AI is a great website in which people can view latest AI tools on what they do, what's the unique about them, and what the trends are.
That's great. It's Nexa AI, you said?
Nexa, Nexa.
Okay. I think since this is just such a conversation that I think is on all of our minds, I'd actually love to pose this also to Andrea and Celine as well. Andrea, how is AI fitting into the conversation for you and your work?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways, and it's such a new technology. I think we're still learning and we're still testing things out. But there are some ways that, for example, we are currently working on the search experience for our site, and WP Engine is in alpha mode at the moment with a new WP Engine Smart Search AI technology. And my team specifically is working with the team that's developing that to be sort of one of the first test cases and put it to use. And I'm really excited about how that is going to impact our search experience and make the searches not only more intuitive, more relevant to what they are looking for, but I think that when you are able to take that search to that level, what it does with your customer is it builds trust, because you're serving up the right thing for them. You're in a sense sort of almost like, it almost feels like you're reading their mind, like what it is they're looking for, and you're being helpful, and you're giving them what they need when they need it, and then it helps sort of like them associate your brand with that good feeling of being served in a way that you need. And so that is like something that's on the horizon, and I'm really excited about how it's going to integrate as we work through that search experience on wpengine.com.
Yeah, and it's great. Wow, good job. I was just going to call that out because it's a really great product. Definitely check it out. And Celine, just sort of wrapping up this moment, I'm curious how it is playing into your work.
Yeah, I mean, I am still experimenting with AI. It's still very new and there's a lot to be educated on. And honestly, or me personally, have used it very minimally. I think part of me still appreciates this aspect of like human touch. And as we all know, AI doesn't always get it right. And so it's something that I think it's going to take a lot of trial and error. And I think just especially we should be utilizing it as a tool and not as a replacement for our work, if that makes sense. We also want the user to still feel like they can trust what we're designing and also feel like they can connect to it.
Absolutely. We every year do something called a Webby talk, where we travel the world and basically give a bit of our perspective at the Webbies about this year in the internet. And we thought a lot about AI this year. And I think one thing that's really coming up, certainly from what you're saying, is like the human part of it is so important, even in technology. The human lens, the human creativity, that's really sort of at the core of what we do. And being able to, amplify AI as a way to help your work, I think is really that perfect union. Celine, I'm curious, with the launch of Apple Vision Pro and devices that embrace like XR, I'm curious, are you finding that it takes a different skill set to design UX for these spaces, whether it is XR, VR, or AR? What does that design process look like?
Yeah, everyone's going crazy about the Apple Vision Pros. We were debating about getting it for the studio, but that's kind of on hold for now. But yeah, I mean, personally, obviously, I haven't worked on AR, VR yet, but I think it's interesting because it really makes us think about how we can kind of combine digital and physical landscapes and how those two can kind of coexist in a more tangible way. And when we are applying this to UX and our designs, we're really thinking about spatial awareness, like where the user is when they're experiencing the product. Just to reference our work, we recently worked on an interactive touchscreen, and that was a huge collaborative effort with like the dev team and design and everything. We really had to think about, where the user is when they're interacting with the screen, their height, like how their distance from the screen, gestures and all that stuff, and just making everything as accessible as possible.
Fascinating. I'm curious, Jingshuan or Andrea, are either of you working in the VR or the XR space?
I'm not at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it being on the horizon, but
Yeah.
at the moment, no.
Same.
Great. So one thing I'll pitch over to you, Andrea, is this idea of hyper-personalization. That is something that has come up a lot in this conversation, and I think we're also learning that digital platforms aren't limited to just mobile, desktop, and handheld screens anymore. They have expanded to these emerging tech products like AR and smartwatches and more. What is it going to take to adapt to these new platforms in UX design and create personalized user experiences?
I mean, I think first and foremost, it's just going to take an open mind and a willingness to embrace these new technologies and not just stay stuck like in what you know.
Yeah.
And I think also to just design in a way that's forward looking, right? So like, that maybe this is not going to happen right now, but what can I do at the moment that will help facilitate that sort of later on? And make that type of application or transition easier later on. But I also think that collaboration with developers and engineers early on in the process is also really key. So you can talk to them about solutions or talk to them about where you are but also where it's going to be later. And they can help give you solutions that are, through their lens and a unique light and perspective, and help you architect that solution. And I think partnering with them and collaborating is just really key as you start thinking about these new types of technologies.
Totally. It's almost like in order to create personalized experiences, you have to be personalized in your approach to building those experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's great. We are designing now for a very dynamic internet. The internet is vast, and it always has been, but it feels like there's now such a broad spectrum of user types and user behavior. Jingshuan, I'm curious, how can you personalize UX when you do have this really broad spectrum of users? That's, I imagine, sort of a hard task. But curious what you've done or what you've experienced in terms of that sort of attempt for personalization.
Sure. Ideally, at LNR, we would need to understand these users thoroughly via a meaningful approach. So, for example, collaborating with our strategist or maybe with UX researchers to understand the user's demographics, interests, behaviors, etc., which these leads to different user groups assisting us to define the user needs and goals like in a very broad spectrum of users. It's Yeah.
Well, and what does it take to personalize that user journey for your audience with the individual user in mind?
Yeah, interesting way to put with individual user in mind. To my understanding, when I have a personal or have a specific persona, although it's in a format of an individual, it's actually a summarization of a group. It's a representation of that group, and when I don't have it, I tend to define the overlapping parts of the journey for multiple type of users. First, a thousand a lot of times will imply these key functions and how most users will use it. Then I'll look into particular needs from a user subset. The approach will also be affected by, I think, within the context, how I segmented the user groups. As example of a usual way would be the first-time users, returned users, and heavy users or power users. But in other contexts, the segmentation might become the roles and rights that they're holding, like view-only users, manager users, admin users, etc. It makes more sense to me to ground them first than designing the flexibility for a specific group or user.
Totally. Well, and as the internet is growing more dynamic and the industry more competitive, Celine, I'm curious, what changes should teams, or what changes maybe have you and your colleagues made on your UX strategies and goals in order to keep up with sort of the quick pace of this new era of UX?
Yeah, I think, as time goes on, UX is going to become more and more kind of business oriented and require a lot of strategy, as we talked about before. With AI and all this new stuff coming out, it's not just about making things visually appealing anymore. We're really going to have to pull back a little bit and think about who we're designing for, why we're designing it, and remember that, our designs, they're really meant to add to the user's life and not really take anything away from it. I think that's something that's really important. And also, again, Andrea's point about accessibility and ethics, really kind of going back to that and having that lead our design decisions.
I love it. Well, and I imagine, how are you pulling your creativity into this work? Because you do come from sort of this design and creative background. Has that been a big part of your strategy in building sort of a more competitive and dynamic offering?
Yeah, I think so. And, it definitely helps to have such a great team of people with such diverse backgrounds and ideas. And we're just able to kind of bounce ideas off of one another, and having that background in graphic design, but also what I know now with my knowledge in UX, it's really rewarding to kind of combine the two and use that to build something.
Great. And I think, as we know, the only constant thing about the internet is it's always evolving. It really feels like every day brings something new. We certainly experienced that at the Webby Awards. But Andrea, I'm curious, how can brands and agencies go beyond just keeping up with these shifts, but really sort of be in front of them, to be in tune with their users? And as a follow-up, can teams better understand their audience's user behavior to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I think continuous research and testing is really key. So making sure that the research and the data that you're using is fresh, and you're not pulling from outdated sources, because it's changing so quickly. You've got to keep up with that. I think it's also really important to make friends with your conversion rate optimization team and your analytics team, and really lean on them for their expertise, and get them to help you analyze what their findings are, and make sure that you're understanding it correctly, and not make any assumptions there. But I also think it's really important to not get too distracted by flashy new technologies. And test them out. Sure, try them out, see what's working and what could help you, but embrace what's working and then leave behind everything else. So if you're trying out a tool and maybe it's not fully developed yet, it's not there yet, it's not quite serving your purpose, it's okay to wait and until it has kind of become more effective for you and you can apply it more effectively. Trendy is not always great. It's trendy, there is tried and true things. So I would say be adaptable there, and always keep in mind like whether the results are working for you or not.
I think that's really beautifully said. And as much as we love a trend and we love to sort of be interested in shiny objects, I just saw someone in the chat say avoid shiny object syndrome. I think there's a real truth to that in also making sure that your experience is as great as it can be for your consumer and for your audience. So many great sort of trends, I guess I'll say, but so many great moments I think that you've all mentioned on, everything from follow-ups around customization and hyper-personalization. I think Celine, you said that context is key. Simplification seems like something that's come up a lot, and the idea of defining ethics being important. I'm seeing that in the chat as well. So many great things arising. As we do wrap up, there will be a little bit of time for Q&A. So for those of you who have questions, please, we'd love to fold you in and answer any of the questions that you have. It's been really great to be seeing all of your chats and your connection to this material. So thank you. But as a final question, I do want to know, what are some maybe exciting themes to watch out for? Maybe less so trends, but what are some themes that we're sort of looking out for, in terms of the optimism and the excitement about where we're going? Jing Xuan, why don't we start with you?
Could you clarify this question a little bit?
I guess like an exciting theme to look out for. We've touched a bit about this, and it might be a little bit of what we've already been discussing, but maybe a UX or digital design evolution that we're looking at in 2024, a theme or an idea that you might think is sort of building to this evolution.
I think I don't remember whether Celine and Andrea has mentioned it, but it really resonated with me. So I think minimalism. I think aside from all the excitement that we talk about, the AI-powered experience, augmented reality, 3Ds, I think it's important we don't forget the core principles that such a clear and solid information architecture, a consistent voice of tone of your product, smooth and interesting micro interaction, those will remain crucial to a user-friendly and engaging experience.
Awesome. Celine, what about you? Any sort of evolving themes or things to think about?
Yeah, I think something that we talked a lot about when I was in school was this idea of emotional design and empathy, how we can connect with our users. Because I think a lot, like especially now with so much going on with AI and like emerging disruptive technologies and this constant, I think, pressure of who's going to be, doing the next big thing. How can we be bigger and better? And I think what people crave is like that, again, going back to that human touch, how can we really make them feel like we're not just putting stuff out there to put it out there. I think as designers, we kind of have a responsibility to be designing for humans as a human. And I think it's so important to kind of just pull back a little bit and, but also again, not sacrificing those like exciting design elements.
And Andrea, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, you set it up very nicely for me, Celine. Thank you. Because I think segueing from that, hyper-personalization is really high on my list of things to be looking out for and harnessing. As it becomes more sophisticated, I think we need to make sure that we are applying it in a way that is helpful for the user and not intrusive, and kind of always asking ourselves, like, again, is this customer inspired? And is this something that's going to help build trust with them? And just because we can do something, should we do it? As technology is unlocked and unfolds, you don't necessarily have to do everything if it's not serving the needs of the customer in the way that is best for them. And so, but also I'm really excited about the insights that we're going to gain from all of this personalization and how it's going to keep improving and just snowballing into making it a better experience. So I think that was a really nice setup for me. Thank you, Celine.
Well, and thank you to all of you. It's been such a pleasure to hear all of your perspectives. Again, if anyone joining us today has questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. We'd love to answer any and all questions. It's really exciting to see so many of you from the UX and the UI world chiming in and really agreeing, I think, so much with what all of you are saying. As I sort of, put that out for a couple more questions from the group, I guess I'd just also love to know, like, has there been any personal favorites of each of yours, of something you worked on this year? I think you all mentioned some great examples, but was there any particular project of yours that you were proud of, or you can sort of call out that we can check out? No pressure.
It's been a crazy year at WP Engine, and in the best way possible. I would say that one thing that I'm really proud of is my team. It took the entire team to do it. All of us came together and collaborated, but we moved our site from traditional WordPress into headless WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened about a year ago, and it's just been incredible to see how we can use our own product. Like, Atlas is a product that we create, and it's been really great to see the changes and the impact that it had on our performance and on all of those things. So that was a huge undertaking, and then from there, we have been, specifically working on different sections of this new, what we're calling 3.0 website. And so currently what I'm working on right now, I sort of mentioned earlier, is a search experience where we are bringing together all of our different repositories of content, and we're using WP Engine Smart Search to aggregate it all so that you can search through all of them, regardless of whether they're on a headless site or not, in one place. And I'm really excited about how helpful that is going to be for the user. And I can't wait to see the results of how it all comes out, as we're testing it and moving forward with that project. But that's something I'm in the middle of, and it's been really cool.
That's awesome. And again, for those of you in the chat, we've called out a couple of websites. We've called out the Smart Search website with WP Engine. Jing Xuan's recommendation, I think, was also put in the chat as well. So definitely cull through that if you want to revisit those. And Celine and Jing Xuan, any sort of, highlights for you that you'd like to call out or mention?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it before, but we worked on an interactive touchscreen for Colgate, and that was my first interactive touchscreen project. And it was a really big team effort. We were, like, as Andrea mentioned, testing is so important. So we spent a lot of time, scaling, working on, touch targets and how that's all going to work. And, like, if elements are going to be moving across the screen vertically or horizontally based on someone's height, and, like, what's the best solution for that. And that was really fun. And we're recently working with Yale's Peabody Museum. We're going to be creating content for the museum, and it's going to be going all in a digital app. So it's going to be really fun and cool to see how that works out.
Jing Xuan, anything from your end?
Yeah, as I mentioned, in Alana, which constantly tests out new technologies, we recently worked on a project called Shoe Marker. It's a really cool 3D project that we are experiencing this new user experience of changing the lighting and settings of a room in a 3D version. Yeah, if you're interested, make sure to check it out.
Awesome. And I actually saw a couple of questions come in, so I will pose this to the group and feel free to chime in. But what are some good pointers to reference in terms of adopting new trends? There are many companies and clients who insist on more information on UI internet apps, which really doesn't embrace where I want to go with minimalism. Any thoughts? Andrea, go for it.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, what are some good pointers to reference in terms of adopting new trends?
Yes.
Yeah.
Adopting new trends, I think, sort of to my point earlier, I would be careful with adopting them and making sure that you're adopting them for a reason and not just adopting them because they're trendy. And I think that also when there are companies or clients who are insisting on certain things, and I think that like it's okay to push back and it's okay to give them reasons why you don't necessarily need to go in that direction. And the beauty of UX design is there's so many resources where we can actually prove it through numbers or research or tests. And so I think it's good to embrace these trends where it makes sense and to sort of use your expertise to make sure that you're part of that conversation and how they get applied.
Totally. Thank you for the question. And actually, I think this leads in nicely. There was another question from Gina Henderson, which said, what are your favorite sources for app testing? Any favorite sources for app testing to the group? Any programs or sources that you are all using?
App testing as in like mobile app testing? Or...
Yeah, let's maybe tell us about those. And Gina, if there's any clarification you have, feel free to let us know. But let's start with mobile testing.
Well, me personally, I haven't worked on any apps yet, but we primarily use Figma. So when we are designing websites, obviously using the prototype view and having it on our actual devices. So using our mobile phones or desktop, widescreen, standard screen, tablet, all that stuff, just to make sure that everything that we're seeing is at a reasonable size and it's all good. Gina just responded. I think, yeah, she was referencing app testing. So if someone else has a better, has more experience with that.
I don't necessarily have an app testing experience, but for the website, we do a lot of A/B testing and things through a tool called Chameleon, and that's a new one that we've started to embrace and has been working really well for us to be able to A/B test and things like that.
Amazing. Well, I think that sort of closes out the questions from the group. I want to just extend another final thank you to Celine, Jingxuan, and Andrea for being here today. It's been such a pleasure hearing your brilliant insights about UX and UI and this new era we live in. Thank you again to WP Engine for being our partner with this. Again, I'm Nick Bornstein from the Webby Awards. We thank you all for being here. It's always such a pleasure to bring the internet to real life. And I'll sign off by saying thank you again, and we'll see you all on the internet. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.